And welcome to Advocacy Tutor. Today I'm going to be speaking to Shaun Wallace. Most of you will know him from The Chase, but I know him from his career at the bar. Shaun is a barrister and was called to the bar in 1984. He practices from Great James Street Chambers in London. Outside of legal circles, Shaun is probably best known, as I said, as being a chaser on the TV game show The Chase, and for being the winner of Mastermind in 2004. I understand that Shaun has also written an autobiography called Chasing the Dream, which was published in 2018. I would suggest that you all go out and buy it. It's a fantastic read, and we'll be talking about that in a few moments. So I'd like to just say welcome, Shaun.
Thank you, Sonia. Pleasure to meet you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for agreeing to be interviewed by me. I know how busy you are, so thank you.
I'll always make time for you, Sonia.
Oh, well, talking about that, let's talk about how we first met. So, yeah. 1993, I was
called 1993. I was at 6 King's Bench Walk practicing criminal law. And you were a pupil. I can't remember whose pupil you were, but whose pupil were you?
Let's not talk about who my pupil master was.
I know. But you did follow me on a couple of cases, didn't you, as I recall? So it wasn't the most happy experience there. Probably not for you and for me either. But we still managed to keep touch, which is really fantastic. And
well, I stayed in touch with you because you were so kind to me, actually. I remember going to court with you and you actually allowing me to sit in your conferences with your clients, but also giving me the papers and asking me for my advice. You were actually interested in what I thought about the case and strategy and so forth. And yeah, you were really, for the most part, you were really kind to me. We've stayed in touch ever since. So I know I've said thank you before for how you treated me, but I'm going to say it again. What I'd like to do is to just start by asking you some questions about your background. So were your parents born in this country or elsewhere? And where were you born?
My parents were born, well, my dad was born in Manchester, Jamaica on the 20th of May, 1928. And my mum was born on the island of Jamaica on the 23rd of October, 1930. So obviously they came over not together because they didn't actually know each other in Jamaica, but they came over separately in the sort of mid to late 50s. They met, I think, sometime in 1958, and they got married in 1960. I think they had to because from the wedding photos of my mum and dad, I could see myself. Yeah, I was born here in Central Middlesex Hospital on the 2nd of June, 1960. So almost 61 years ago now.
And in terms of your educational background, I know it wasn't a particularly easy time for you at school. Perhaps you'd like to talk about that.
Not just for me, for anybody who had coloured skin darker than the shade of white, because you know, the education establishment had a sort of low expectation of people of colour. If you were black male, they expected you to either work in a factory or work as a bus driver. Worse still, if you were a black female, they expected you to either live in a high-rise flat, pregnant with loads of children with no father. And it was an anathema if you were a black young student who wanted to be a doctor, lawyer, or dentist. Yeah. That's such a low expectation.
Yeah, I remember, do you remember careers advisors at school?
Oh, yeah. Well, in my case, when I was 12 years old, I actually wrote to the Bar Council, me and a friend of mine, who also wanted to be a lawyer, and he also qualified as a lawyer, became an employment law judge. And we both got the letter back, and I always kept that letter as a source of inspiration for me. And a couple of years later, when you go starting that rite of passage of doing your exams, whereas in the 1970s, it was a two-tier system. You had the CSEs and the O-levels in terms of streaming, and they expected you, if you're black, to actually do CSEs. So I brought that letter to my careers teacher and I said, look, I want to be a lawyer. She goes, you, Wallace, at best you're going to end up stacking shelves. At worst, you're probably going to end up in prison. You know, it's easy for a person to allow another to actually control your own destiny. And it was devastating and disappointing to hear that from your own careers advisor. But when I left that room, the one thing I was determined, and I suppose it was from that moment on, that the only way I was going to stay in control of my own life and my own destiny is to make sure I had an educated mind.
I had a similar experience. I think at the time I wanted to be a social worker, and the careers advisor said, and I'd actually done O levels, and the career advisor said to me, "No, I think you'd be better off working in a shop, or at best be a secretary."
Yeah,
So
exactly.
those were the expectations that they had of people of color back then.
Yeah, and I say when I left that school, I said that there's no way I'd ever go back into that school unless they invited me. And the school was only like a mile and a half from where I actually live. Because I mean, I still live in the same area,
Yeah.
and I have done for the last 55 years. Anyway, fast forward to 1993, it was my 33rd birthday. And it happened to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the Black Law Society. And the then chairman, who was a good mate of mine, Peter Herbert, said to me, "Shaun, would you like to do an article for The Guardian?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, I'm not doing anything." And it happened to be my 33rd birthday. So if you see the article in The Guardian, I stood outside 6 KBW, instead of wearing the usual sort of city pinstripe suit, because it was my birthday, I had on a sort of silk jacket, an earring in my ear, and that's how I took the photograph. So anyway, the way they described me as a sort of more looking like a footballer than a sort of a barrister. Anyway, who happened to read it? My old PE teacher. And he told me he nearly choked in his cornflakes who read it. So they wrote to me. They said to me, "Are you the same Shaun Wallace who used to attend Copeland, who used to
Yeah.
newspaper? If you are, can you ring and get in touch?" So I rang him up and I said, "Yes, it is me. I used to go to Copeland High School." They said, "We'd love you to come back to the school." Well, so far as I'm concerned, that was the invite. So when I went there, Sonia, I went in the most expensive suit, the most expensive shoes, silk shirt. I looked $1 million, and I walked into that school, and I felt like the return of the prodigal son. Only this prodigal son wasn't wasting with his time, because that's what the prodigal son is, who wasted his time. Yeah. So anyway, lined up there were some of the teachers who taught me, and one of them's jaw dropped so low you could have actually picked it up with a sort of forklift truck. And I shook their hands. And it was a wonderful experience, you know, because when you go back to your old school, you feel like Gulliver going back to Lilliput. And there wasn't a hint of animosity from my part, because the one thing I made sure was that you weren't controlling my destiny. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my own life, and that was to become a lawyer. So, you know, I then sort of gave out the prizes, and I sort of gave a lecture to all the sort of students in relation to the importance of education and the importance of not being told what you can't do, and don't be frightened to dream. Anyway, fast forward 10 years later, I won Mastermind. Yeah. I'm now the school's most famous son. And it so happened to coincide with the school's 50th anniversary. So they wrote to me again. And they said, "We're having a special 50th anniversary dinner at the House of Lords. We'd love you to be our guest of honor. Would I come?" That's an invite to me. So again, I made sure Hugo Boss shirt, Hugo Boss tie, looked $1 million, walked into the House of Lords. And I was the only student they invited of the past 50 years. Wow. And I'm sitting there in a meeting, and I said to myself, it just goes to show, if you allow people to actually control your destiny, you know, you'll be nothing really.
Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it?
It does, and that's the one thing that I was determined that they were not going to turn me into.
You mentioned earlier on that you wanted to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. At what age did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer, and why?
At the age of 11, I used to watch programs like Rumpole or the Bailey. I mean, John Mortimer was one of my all-time heroes. I knew about him from the age of 12. You know, he was one of the top QCs in the country. And it was a great thrill when I eventually met him in 2005, because there was a lawyer who was writing a book about legal characters. And I happened to be a chapter in that book called The Defense Junior. And anyway, the foreword was written by John Mortimer, and he described me in such fantastic terms. And I met him at a quiz, and you know, he was all frail and elderly, and he knew who I was. And I said, "Sir John, this is probably one of the greatest honors. You were the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer." Because everybody has heroes to look up to and aspire. I mean, I wanted to be like Rumpole because he was a fantastic lawyer who put his client's interest first, who was always wily in cross-examination and always got the best result. So, you know, people like that were role models for me growing up, and that's what I wanted to be.
And you managed to obviously be called to the bar. Were there any obstacles to getting there?
Well, the obstacles were self-inflicted because of the fact that although I had a sort of, you know, a very good memory, the one thing I didn't have was the ability to know how to pass exams. And it was a really trepid rite of passage passing those A-levels. You know, when all my friends were going off to university and I didn't make the requisite grades, you know, it was very, very disappointing. And I thought that, you know, I had no option B, and I thought my future was behind me. But one of the reasons I talked about that in the book, because I want people to realize that I wasn't born famous, I wasn't born clever, and I did have my setbacks, and everybody has setbacks in life. And I think it's important that you learn and you grow from those setbacks, and you try to overcome them. Obviously, it's got to come from within for you to actually overcome those setbacks. But as long as you've got the requisite support of people who've got your back, people who've always got your best interests at heart, like your mother, your father, your friends, and some teachers who really did have my best interests at heart, especially in relation to another secondary school I went to called Elstone High, and they really had my best interests at heart after I left that original school. And eventually the penny dropped, and you know, I got my degree at undergraduate level, and they say the best 3 years of your life is spent as an undergraduate level at I went to the Polytechnic of North London. And even to this day, getting called to the bar on 7th of November 1984 is the best thing that happened to me. Because as a young boy, I was like Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest, I'm going to be a lawyer. And if you talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. And I did. But even at that point, you know, and you've experienced it yourself, Sonia, it must have been the proudest moment of your life when you got called to the bar.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even at that point, when I was celebrating, the one thing which struck home to me, when I was looking up all the plaques of all the illustrious lawyers of my inn, the one thing what struck home to me was this: all that hard work, you know, coming off the academic conveyor belt to that moment in time, all it simply done was bring me to the start line of a different challenge. And that's all what success does.
Well, you mentioned some setbacks, and we've all experienced setbacks at the bar. But when I first met you, when I was a pupil in your chambers, I remember there was a newspaper article about you, and you've mentioned the article earlier on, where you're wearing your earring, and the press referred to you as more akin to a footballer than a barrister. And I think you were on a massive winning streak when I met you. You hadn't lost a case in months.
Well, twice in my career, I've gone through the entire career without a calendar year without losing. But sometimes it's not about that. You know, it was really, really disappointing, because you think that if you win cases, you get support, but that simply was not forthcoming. And no matter how you try to climb that greasy pole of legal progression, you know, sometimes you feel yourself inexorably sliding down it. You know, maybe I had that sort of rose-tinted glasses approach to the career at the bar, thinking that, you know, if you worked hard, put your interest client first, and you got the result, then your career was going to progress in the upward trajectory you'd hoped. But it doesn't really work out that way. You know, it depends on who you know, and you're prepared to pander to. And that's the one thing I was not prepared to do.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, you then saw a sort of downward trajectory of my career, leading to the point of toward the end of the century of 1999, where I thought that my career was over, really.